Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thank you all for joining us on this Friday morning, last day of the work week. We have a very special guest today. Our state senator, Tom Barrett, has joined us. Tom is doing a great job representing us in Lansing, not just right now, but since he started, and very grateful he's made some time today to give us a update on what's happening, but we're also going to open this up for Q&A. So a little bit different format as well. We had our federal representatives on, and we had sort of pre-questions that I asked. And for today, though, we're going to open it up for all of you on the line. If you have, if you have a question for Tom, please jump on, and then, as I said, just hit *6 when you want to ask a question. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Tom, and once again, thank you for jumping on today. Thank you for your service to Shiawassee County in Lansing. So go ahead.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much, and thank you for all of you who are, the leaders really in our community and the pillars that we've relied on for so long. For participating today and for staying engaged as we work through this really unique set of circumstances that we're facing as a society, as an economy, as policymakers, everything. I mean, this is unlike any challenge we've dealt with in any of our lifetimes. Certainly, it's something that we have to balance out and deal with appropriately. I really appreciate the opportunity to serve you in Lansing and to be your state senator. I've been in office almost a year and a half now, and it's been something that I learn new things every day, not just during this current situation that we're facing, but outside of that, I learn new things about my constituents and their unique circumstances every single day that I'm in this job, and it's something that I really value as an experience, and I hope to be a good advocate for you by learning things about the challenges that you're facing and how we can best prepare state government to be an encouragement to business and economic growth instead of a hindrance to that. Obviously, the challenge we're facing right now with COVID-19, the governor's put quite a few restrictions in place. I don't know how familiar you are with a lot of the emergency powers that the governor has, so I'll give a brief overview. There are two different emergency powers laws in the state of Michigan that govern what the governor is allowed to do during times of emergency and times of crisis. There's a law, Public Act 302 from 1945. Obviously, the time that was drafted was, at the tail end of World War II. We were facing different challenges across the world and across the country. And the legislature passed a law that allowed the governor to intervene and have a pretty commanding presence in the times of real catastrophe and turmoil. It's my opinion that in a fair reading of that statute that it really is limited to acts of violence that are causing a state of emergency. Rioting and catastrophe and incidents like that are the examples given within that statute. That does not require any type of legislative approval for the governor to continue a state of emergency indefinitely. There's another statute that was passed in 1976 that did not repeal the older law, but it is also, I would say, complementary to that. It's Public Act 390 from 1976, and it gives kind of broader scope authority, not just acts of violence, but even an epidemic is mentioned in the law from 1976. But that law requires the governor to come to the legislature after 28 days and either say that the emergency is no longer so pervasive that we need to continue an emergency order, or the governor would need to get permission from the legislature to continue the state of emergency beyond that first 28 days. So for the first 28 days, they can act pretty unilaterally. After that, they need the legislature to continue that state of emergency or declare that the emergency is now over. Governor Whitmer in March declared a state of emergency related to the coronavirus outbreak. That 28-day window was set to expire the first week of April, last week sometime. And at the time that she was seeing that order coming to a conclusion, she asked the legislature for a 70-day extension that would have gone through June. We did not feel that was an appropriate thing to just toss over the keys of the state of Michigan to one singular person with no input from us in the legislature and no balancing of that power that we have in our state and in our state constitution. The people like myself and Representative Frederick that you've elected to be your advocates in the state legislature would have had no voice in that decision making until the governor came back to us sometime in the middle or end of June. And we felt that was not an appropriate use of our state government authority to set that with only one singular person. So we pushed back on that, and instead we decided to go with the federal CDC guidelines and the coronavirus task force recommendations that were coming out of Washington, D.C., that were basically saying we should have enhanced measures in place until the end of April. That didn't mean that we were endorsing or condoning all of the specific executive orders that the governor put out, but rather that umbrella of a state emergency that empowers her to make those decisions. So we extended the state of emergency until April 30th. That's what we're currently witnessing right now. At the time, I will say that we felt we were making headway with the governor around loosening some of the restrictions in her executive order, allowing businesses that were very low risk, even if they were not determined to be essential. We were asking her to look at it through the lens of what's safe and what may be more risky. We felt last week that we were making significant progress with her administration on that. Felt comfortable setting out the April 30th deadline. And that, again, allowed us, if things didn't go how we thought was appropriate, allowed us to intervene sooner than waiting all the way to the middle of June to be able to have legislative intervention. We approved the extension to the end of April, and then a couple of days later, the governor, by my surprise and in some disappointment, instead of loosening some of the things around areas of the economy that are very, very low risk, lawn mowing, landscaping, outdoor construction, things that can be completed very, very safely. Instead, she tightened down further on those types of businesses, banning the ability for people to walk into a store and buy gardening supplies, having your lawn mowed by a person that you don't have any personal contact with, and they come to your house and mow the lawn, and you see them out the kitchen window, but you don't interact with them. No risk of the spread of the virus in that case. The governor still tightened down further. Out of response to that, you saw a lot of the folks come out a couple of days ago at the Capitol to really protest that level of control that the governor had imposed. It's my sense that people have a sincere desire to see this virus, controlled to the greatest extent possible, but we don't want to give up our individual rights and freedoms along the way. We're willing to make some sacrifices. That's the consistent word that I get from my constituents is, look, we know this is a serious illness. We know this is a serious virus. Thankfully, we've been able to contain it pretty well based upon the projections that were in place that have not held true. And we're thankful for that. And I think it's time that we start to return the individual freedoms and rights that we all have back to our state of what that should be respected by. Just yesterday, the Senate Majority Leader put out a phased approach, a 5-phase plan for reopening the economy based upon the data of the spread of the virus, the days that it's occurred where the numbers have been dropping instead of rising, taking a regionalized approach so that some communities where the risk is very low and the virus is not very present could be allowed to open more robustly than areas of the state that are more hit by the effects of the virus. It would take into account the hospital capacity figures, as well as the infection rate and the amount of testing that is available. I am going to be on a conference call with the Majority Leader in about 45 minutes to get a few more details on that, but they just publicly released that yesterday. And that's going to be some of the plan that we're working off of in the Senate to make recommendations to the governor. And then come April 30th, I can tell you it's mostly my position right now to not extend the state of emergency powers to the governor beyond April 30th. I don't feel confident that she's taking into consideration the role of the legislature at this time. I wish that I could report to you that we were working more collaboratively, but she announced in the media that she was working with other governors of other states adjacent to us, the other neighboring Midwest states, working with their governors on a plan to reopen the economy, but she has not consulted our legislature in that process. And you didn't elect the governor of Ohio to make decisions for you in Michigan, but you did elect your legislators to have that voice in that role. So we feel strongly that, our Constitution is clear. There's a balance of power, and there are co-equal branches in state government. The legislature is not a subordinate branch to the governor. We are an equal branch to the executive and to the governor, and we should not have that role diminished. And I don't feel that any singular person, regardless of it's this governor or any other governor in history or in the future, should have unilateral control of state government for any longer than is absolutely critical to address an emergent threat that we're facing as a state. And that's why our emergency statutes should only be invoked in the rarest of circumstances. And when we have the ability to then discern and debate and discuss things, that's where the legislature is tasked with coming in to make those decisions. And any further decisions should be made legislatively, I feel, and not just unilaterally by one person with his or her own decision making, again, whether it's this governor or any governor after this point. So we're working hard. I trust you, my constituents, to make wise decisions and to make the choices necessary to protect you and your families and your businesses, to make decisions as to what that looks like. There will be those who don't heed the medical advice and the medical experts who've advised us to socially distance and wear protection and everything else. But at the end of the day, we can't live people's lives for them forever, and we can't perpetuate this indefinitely. Some of the experts are saying this virus could be around for a year or two, and certainly we can't live clustered, or cooped up in our homes for 2 years. That's a preposterous, expectation to have. So we have to trust people to make wise decisions as they go about their daily lives. And we don't have to make the false decision between lives and livelihoods. We can do both. We can do it smartly. And that's going to be my ask, that we continue down that path of not forcing us to make a decision between lives and livelihoods, but to be able to do both. And with that, I hope all of you are well. And I'd certainly be happy to answer any specific questions that you have and do my best to help.
Wow. Well, thank you, Tom. I appreciate all of those thoughts. I know there's some questions from some of the folks listening. So as I mentioned, if you have questions or comments, just hit *6 and jump right in and ask them. So go ahead.
Hi.
Did I hear somebody?
This is
Yeah, go ahead.
With Respite Volunteers of Shiawassee.
Yep.
And I'm an RN, and I just kind of wanted to point out for Shiawassee County, the numbers aren't controlled yet, especially because of there not being enough face masks for the nursing homes and assisted living. So a whole bunch of the numbers here in Shiawassee County are actually the staff and a few residents from one nursing home. And I thank you for speaking with us this morning and doing all that you are doing. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And we are working as best we can with our federal partners, with FEMA and with state agencies. We appropriated over $150 million for coronavirus relief before we kind of went into our more remote posturing as a legislature. And that was to go toward addressing the needs of the medical supply chain, building up resources and responding to the virus. And we put very few conditions on that funding for the governor and for her administration. It wasn't a blank check, but as long as it was going toward coronavirus response, we were not in there nitpicking how they were going to spend it, so that if we needed more money for masks and less money for ventilators or vice versa, the administration has the really flexibility to apply that to the best needs that they see. And so we are hearing that the stockpile or the reserves of masks and gloves and PPE at our hospitals was less than a day or a half a day a few weeks ago, and is now over a week, or, and this is not every single hospital in the state, but as an aggregate total, most of our hospitals now have several days of a supply, or in some cases over a week's worth. And I think, just like we're seeing at the grocery store, as more supplies become put into people's reserves, there's no longer the same types of shortages then on the shelves when you go into the grocery store and try and buy paper towels or toilet paper. So we are hearing good progress on that, but of course we need to make sure that continues as well.
Tom, I have a question. This is Justin again. I'll jump in and ask one. One of the big issues we've been hearing just in the last few days is unemployment. Now, that's a couple of things there. There's concern, obviously, that the state's unemployment system could go bankrupt in a very short period of time. And there was an article that we might have to borrow and raise taxes, which is very concerning. But also what I'll call the disincentive to work. I've had a couple of large factories in Shiawassee County that have had issues with that, where people are making more money now on unemployment than what they were making before due to the federal stimulus. So how can we address those issues through state government?
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you asked that question, because unemployment is probably the biggest constituent call that we're getting right now. It kind of has moved in, peaks and troughs. So at the beginning it was, is my business essential or not? How do I find out? What if this? What if that? We kind of waded through those waters. Then it was, do I have to stay home for these reasons or those reasons? And then it quickly pivoted to unemployment. And certainly with the federal package that passed, more people are eligible. And more people who were traditionally not eligible, self-employed and smaller sized businesses that were not eligible previously, were made eligible by the federal stimulus that granted that additional stipend to people on unemployment. I actually have someone in my office who I hired just before all of the stay-home orders went into effect. Just coincidentally, we had an opening in my office, and his hiring took place just before that happened. And I have tasked him with being singularly assigned to unemployment questions from constituents of mine. And my office phone line is 517-373-3447. And Bryce Fisher on my staff is who I have dedicated entirely to unemployment questions. So if you have questions about eligibility or getting through the system or having trouble navigating it, please, call my office and we will do our best. We don't always have the exact answer because we're learning along the way as well. There are a lot of changes that have yet to be figured out, but I'm having Bryce really be the singular point of contact on that, so we can build a knowledge base in our office to try and help as many constituents that have similar conditions that they're facing to really extend that as best we can. To your question, though, about the disincentive to work, that's a very serious concern that we have as well. In our Republican-controlled state legislature, we feel that, we have to stand strong to make sure that we remind people that we are an economy based upon self-reliance, productivity, and individual responsibility. And I was disappointed that the federal package at the U.S. Senate level, Lindsey Graham offered an amendment that just would have said you can't earn more on unemployment than you make working. And that amendment was rejected. So there was an attempt to just make that small concession that said, look, we're going to pay these claims and we're going to keep people afloat and we're going to do our best to not tank the economy more than it already is going to be done by keeping people with a lifeline. But that doesn't mean you should earn more on unemployment than you make working. And instead, that amendment was rejected. And now you have that lopsided situation where people are going to be incentivized to stay home longer than they otherwise should. Now, in Michigan unemployment law, you're not allowed to decline a callback to work if you're temporarily unemployed. that should disqualify you from unemployment if you try and continue to receive benefits when your boss has called you back to work after the orders are lifted. However, we're trying our best to make sure that that requirement is enforced through our administration in Lansing, through Governor Whitmer's administration, and we are going to be watching that very closely. I'm not going to pretend that nobody's going to game the system and do their best to find a way, but we are going to do our best to make sure that that individual responsibility aspect of our economy is still respected when these orders are lifted and people are expected to get back to work.
Hey,
Thank
Justin,
you,
this
Tom.
is Barry Paxton. I have a question for
Yeah,
Tom
go ahead,
also,
Barry.
along those lines.
Yeah, go ahead,
Hey,
Barry.
Tom, thank you. Thank you for the information. Outstanding. I'm glad we have your support, obviously. It seems,
Thank you.
unfortunately, based on your opening, that Governor Whitmer is putting her political aspirations ahead of the citizens and the business owners in our state right now. I mean, she's manipulating, controlling. It was almost a bait and switch that you explained there. On CNN,
Yeah.
you know, we can't have essential workers and we can't have lawn care companies and people like that out there working, but she's got her hair and her makeup and her nails and everything done while she's on CNN. I mean, it's just, this is
Yeah.
just very, very frustrating.
Yeah.
I have approximately 100 frontline team members in the essential industry of senior home care. They're out there every day. Obviously, these incentives are overly generous, and people, you know, there's very limited criteria that people have to file for unemployment. What specifically are you seeing, and what's happening for these essential frontline workers that are out there every day in the hospitals, in seniors' homes, in these assisted living and independent living facilities? What are we doing to help incentivize them? Is there any legislation, anything that's being proposed? Because that would help a ton. That would encourage our team members to feel confident that they're doing a great job and remain working and helping people.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, and thank you for your folks who are doing that. That's just really, probably they didn't expect to be on the front lines of this when they started working in the industry. They thought they were going to be a caretaker and you know, had a servant's heart for that, but they didn't expect to be putting themselves at the risk they are just to continue to do their job. So really, my hat's off to them, and please pass along my thanks to your staff who are doing that, because that's really such a critical function that we need to remember. One of the things that was done under the federal plan, and I don't know how or if this would apply to private businesses, we were looking at it more through the state of Michigan, because I manage 4 State Department budgets through the State Senate. I chair the subcommittee on appropriations for the Department of State Police, the Department of Corrections, the Judiciary, which pays all the judges' salaries and those associated costs, and the Department of Military and Veteran Affairs, which of course is the State National Guard and our Veterans Affairs part of our state government as well. All of those are essential businesses in the state, or not businesses, but essential tasks, jobs within the state of Michigan. The federal government offered an additional 2 weeks of paid sick leave to deal with coronavirus, with childcare, and with other things to folks. That was incorporated into state government for all state employees, but those that are considered the most essential were not given that 80 hours of paid sick leave, and instead are given a every paycheck. So every 2 weeks, they're getting, I think, $750 in additional pay that's considered at-risk or hazard pay for the jobs that they're undertaking. Now, that's put us in a position where some of our state-employed essential workers are getting this enhanced pay, but some of our private or even local sheriff's department, police departments may not be getting it. And so it's a good thing that we're doing it for our state employees, but I'd love to say that we are doing it for the remainder of the workforce. And I don't know if the federal package with so much that was in it, if it empowers smaller either businesses or smaller communities that have a police force or fire department, EMTs that are going out and doing these things, if they're going to qualify for that enhancement as well, because that would be an enhancement to work, or an incentive to work, instead of an incentive to not work. And I think those are things we have to look at as a better investment with our tax dollars.
Well, and some of the tax incentives, create cash flow issues as well, because if I had all of my team members go out on unemployment, or I had to do paid sick leave, right, we can't afford that as a small business. And so it's both the public and the private sector where things like this are really essential. and then the funding
Right.
runs out on the, they kind of put the disaster loan on hold, the payroll protection program. Now we ran out of money yesterday midday. And so there's
Right.
a ton of us out there in business that we heard, well, you're in the process, you may be approved. Well, the dollars are going quickly, and now you have these bipartisan challenges back and forth, and people want to put this in and put that in, and they're forgetting
Right.
about the business owners and the people that are out there trying to help stimulate the economy where we can.
Right, right. And I'm sorry I don't have a great answer for you for what's going to happen at the federal level. That's where obviously the source of all of this is basically originating. I think all of us think they could have done things a little bit differently at the federal level, the incentives, the disincentive to work and all of those types of things. And I know our federal, Congressman Molinar was very much in support of limiting benefits to not create that disincentive to work. And unfortunately, that wasn't a part of it. I don't know what the landscape for what they're going to do in Washington, if they're going to, basically pour money into the SBA or not, and what that will look like and what the terms and conditions will be, and how that will all come through. We at the state of Michigan, back in March, I was able to work to get a postponement to the business taxes with no penalty or interest back in March. I don't know yet if the governor has postponed beyond that, but I assume that with all of the stay-home order and everything else in effect, that would be further postponed because of the hardship that's presented. And we wanted to preserve that cash flow for our small businesses to the greatest extent possible. We have a rainy day fund in Michigan. It's about $1.2 billion right now that we can kind of shoulder some of that cash flow temporarily, and hopefully keep some of our small businesses afloat by postponing some of their liabilities as best we can.
Great. Well, thank you for the support.
Sorry, this is Mike Gillette from Beach Rock. I want to follow up on Barry's comment there. Earlier on, we had submitted an application for the Michigan Small Business Relief Program. $10 million was for the state of Michigan. Some or all counties got a grant portion, and then there was a loan portion attached to that for the $10 million. Is there any thought to open up the $10 million now that the Triple P is at this point tabled, where maybe we can make application to the state of Michigan for that loan that was 1/4 percentage point?
Yeah, so I will say there's definitely contemplation around a lot of those different aspects of it. I know the MEDC put out that $10 million. I think a lot of that got gobbled up pretty quickly. And now we're kind of pivoting to looking at how we kind of interconnect with what the federal government is doing. At the beginning of this, it was, well, we assume the feds are going to do something big because the news was suggesting they were going to. And we were trying to just get our small businesses by long enough until some of the federal programs would come online to allow them to do some things. But now it's like, we're finding there are gaps in there, some that should qualify that are, that fund is running dry at the federal level, and what can we do as a state? One of the things that we're also contemplating at the same time is we've had a giant, bottom falling out of our state budget because people aren't going out and engaging in commerce. People aren't going out and working to pay, income taxes and payroll withholdings, and they're not going out and buying things. They're not going on vacation. They're not renting hotel rooms. All of that cumulatively has put a major strain onto the state budget. And the challenge that we're facing with that is just in fiscal year 20. We're halfway through fiscal year 20 right now, and we appropriated money for this fiscal year at a spending rate that was on the expectation of the economic forecast that we had. That was the best information at the time, which was prior to coronavirus becoming an issue. So all of our state departments spent money 6 months through the year at the rate that they were appropriated to end the year at a balanced budget state. Then we had this massive blow from coronavirus, and we're now having to intervene mid-year and make really aggressive cuts to state government because we can't run a deficit. We can't borrow money to pay our operational costs and expenses. We're having to look at, saving money within our current budget, and that steeper cut is more aggressive because we're already halfway through the year. If we had started this October 1st when the fiscal year began, those cuts would have been more gradually absorbed, but instead we're halfway through the year and now we're having to cut much more aggressively to finish the year in a balanced budget state. So we're, definitely very sensitive to the needs of our business community and everything else. I don't know, we don't have a large, we have the rainy day fund, that $1.2 billion, but some of that is going to have to go toward paying state police troopers and corrections officers and those that we can't even lay off if we wanted to because they perform the most critical functions of state government. So finding money to pay for some programs is going to be difficult in the next few years, but it's something that we definitely, it's a chicken and the egg thing. You can't have businesses go under because then you get less revenue to pay your functions as a state, and you can't pay those functions as a state if you don't have a business community that's thriving and employing people, and people are buying things and moving money through the economy that generates tax revenue. So it's a real pinch and difficult situation that we're in for sure.
Thank you.
Hey, Tom, this is
Yes.
John Hinkard. I got a quick question, but just real quick a statement. I have a business in downtown Owasso that is closed, like everybody else, and but I meet twice a week on Zoom with a lot of the downtown businesses, and so when we're talking about the possibility of reopening, we are obviously all concerned about revenues, but our number one thing that we talk about is opening safely for both our employees, our customers. So when we hear out there that, oh my gosh, you guys are just worried about your pocketbook and you don't care about the safety, that overwhelmingly is not what we have in our meetings. I mean, it is, what can we do to make sure we open safely? So
yes,
my question is,
that's great.
You guys gave the authority to the governor till the 30th. So if you do not extend that state of emergency, is she able to extend the stay at home on her own, or does she need that authority from the legislature?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would say legally, I feel that she does not. She feels that she does. And it goes back to those two different state statutes that govern emergency powers for the governor. The older statute from 1945 does not require the legislature to extend the emergency declaration. The newer law from 1976 does require that. The law from 1976 did not replace the older law. It was added to. It wasn't a replacement and repeal of the older law. So she is claiming authority under both emergency power statutes, the one from 1976 and the one from 1945. I feel strongly that in a fair reading of that law from 1945, it's really limited to acts of physical violence. It even mentions rioting, catastrophe, and similar disaster, I think is the language that is used. The law from 1976 is more broad. It incorporates more aspects and contemplations and specifically mentions an epidemic. So to me, a judge reading those two laws and reading the application by Governor Whitmer, to me would say, well, this law came later, so it should have more consideration because it came later in time. It's also more narrowly tailored for this specific circumstance. It mentions an epidemic, so it's more prescriptive and less open. And when you're dealing with such broad authority in removing other branches of government from consideration, I think you have to go with the most limited application that's reasonable. And that would be under the law from 1976 that requires us as a legislature to grant extensions as we see appropriate. What I'm hoping we can do is work legislatively to pass even, short-term policy that would allow for us to continue to open safely and do the things that you're talking about, but do it through legislative, making of bills that become laws that have a, 1 month sunset. Maybe we do a bill that takes effect May 1st and expires May 30th, and it has different, provisions within it. Things like giving our medical community immunity as they try to deal with the coronavirus and experimental practices and techniques. There were executive orders the governor issued that allowed doctors and nurses and others licensed in other states to practice here in Michigan if they were choosing to. It allowed, nursing students who are graduating this year to begin working before they took their medical boards because they can't take them right now with everything shut down. So they can work under the supervision of other medical professionals in their field, knowing that they're going to go back and take their boards later, but we want to get them working and in the system now. So those were all really good provisions that we want to see continue. But I feel I don't have any intention of extending the state of emergency because I don't feel that we've had a fair collaboration with the governor in that regard. So to me, I want to do what we can to preserve the elements that are good and then give that flexibility to business owners, like you said, to do the right thing, to open safely, and to have the safety of their customers and their workforce absolutely of paramount concern. And that's the overwhelming, unanimous feedback I get from the business owners in my district, is that they want to do this and they want to do it the right way and they want to do it safely, and they're aware, they're smart people. There's a reason you have a business. You're a smart person and you can figure out complicated issues and work through them. And this is no different than, other complicated and difficult situations we've worked through in the past.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, I guess to summarize, though, it could end up with a court challenge if we say we're not extending the emergency. And I don't know what the entire legislature will decide to do, but I'm certainly developing my own thoughts on this before we get to April 30th. I don't know what the entire legislative consent will be, but if we do not extend this emergency, she may choose to invoke the older law and claim that it applies, and then either we in the legislature or a private citizen who's affected by it would be able to challenge that at that time and raise a court challenge to that. I will say yesterday too, I introduced a bill that actually would repeal that older law from 1945, so that it would take that argument off the table. Now, we're not going to pass that bill before April 30th. There's not a feasible way to do that legislatively before April 30th. And the governor would have to sign it, which she's already said she would not. But it's something that I think is worthy of the debate and discussion. If we already have an emergency powers law from 1976 that allows the legislature more input, then I think it makes sense to just take that argument off the table and repeal the law from 1945.
Tom, this is Justin. And John's spot on with this. I'm hearing this from a lot of our businesses. Here's my question to you. How can we take the great ideas that our businesses in Shiawassee County are going to do in terms of providing safety to their customers and workers? How can we get that to you, to get that to the state to influence policy going forward?
Yeah, thank you. You can definitely contact my office either by email or phone. My phone number 517-373-3447, and my email is sentbarrett@senate.michigan.gov. So sentbarrett@senate.michigan.gov. If you have ideas for what you think are appropriate, please send them to us. There is a work group, a bipartisan work group of senators. There's 6 senators on the work group. I'm not assigned to that. I've been assigned some other tasks. But there is a bipartisan work group making recommendations to what we ought to be looking at. I will tell you, since the very beginning of this, when the governor shut down schools back in March, I've been asking the administration and asking our leadership to ask the administration, which they've been consistently doing, what is going to be our measurement of when we can resume some level of normalcy. And, you can't go into something. It reminds me a lot, frankly, of the war in Afghanistan. You go in, you intervene, but then you're stuck there forever. And we can't have that happen with our economy, and we can't have that happen with our livelihoods. So we have to have some measurement of what victory looks like. If that's when our hospitals are able to manage the flow of coronavirus patients that are coming in? Is it when we have enough PPE and ventilators to deal with the threat that is present? Is it when our numbers are dropped to a certain level, if the infection rate is below a certain percentage? What does it look like? And the more we can commit to that early, the more we can hold ourselves to that standard. And unfortunately, the governor has not committed to anything other than, I'm going to listen to the medical professionals, and really vague standards that are okay, but they don't give us a light at the end of the tunnel to look for. And that's what I think we got to focus some of our attention on, is saying, look, these restrictions are not a new normal. They can't be the new normal. These restrictions are so limited. They limit our freedom so severely. I can't even go to my neighbor's house and borrow a tool to work on my, my car or my, lawnmower or something like that. I can't, drive to the store and buy paint. These types of things are not what America is. And that's not what we've fought wars over. And I think that our freedoms have to be the paramount consideration of this, and they should only be limited to the shortest period of time possible and in the most limited way possible. And I think that has to be our lens that we look at this through. So if people have ideas, certainly please send them to us, and I will pass them along to that work group. I also encourage you that the media has been reporting on the majority leader's plan, this 5-phase plan that deals with the infection rate in different communities. When the numbers drop to a certain level, I to be honest with you, it's fairly detailed, so I can't summarize it easily over the phone. But it basically looks at, if the infection rate drops for, 7 out of 10 days in a row, then it puts you into this category. And then if the hospital rate, of bed space is opened up by this amount, then this puts you in the lower risk category. And it kind of looks at it county by county, so that those areas of the state that are less affected will be able to embrace more opening quicker than some other parts of the state that are certainly much more affected and may be wise to have a few more restrictions temporarily.
Senator Barrett.
Go ahead.
My name is Greg Remington. I live in Shiawassee County. I just got a question. Given all this talk about safety and we're the third highest death rate in the country, I know this is going to be a tough question, but what was your take on what went on in Lansing? Did you condone what went on there a couple days ago? It didn't look very safe. It looked like a pack of firecrackers, and somebody could have started shooting off some guns. I just wanted to know what your take on that was.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I have a slightly different perspective just because I see demonstrations at the Capitol all the time. So I'm a little, less, they don't shock me quite as much. I mean, there's a demonstration at the Capitol almost every day of the week that we're there. I mean, you name the cause, there's somebody there protesting, and some are large and some are small. I will tell you what, and I was in Lansing kind of unrelated to the whole protest. I was there to introduce some legislation and had to get it enrolled before session yesterday and had to drop it off. Wednesday, I think, that the protest was going on. And I got off the freeway and I had to park my car illegally because I was like 5 blocks from the Capitol and couldn't get any closer to the Capitol building. I had to park illegally and walk the rest of the way to the Capitol building. And what I saw, you had some people that were there that were a little more edgy, I would say, for being polite about it. They had, maybe a little bit more of a flair or a tone to them. But the vast majority of people that I saw that were there were small business owners who had the name of their business, on the side of their pickup truck, Bob's Landscaping or, Joe's plumbing business or whatever. I mean, all of these small businesses from across the state had their, panel vans and pickup trucks and, their family name on the side that their business is named after, that maybe 2 or 3 generations deep, that they were so proud of what they had built and what maybe their parents had built before them and their grandparents before that. And they were just looking to get back to work and be reasonable about it. So that's kind of the overwhelming sentiment that I got from those that I saw that were there. They weren't there, they were upset, and they were certainly, impassioned, but they weren't crossing the line, I would say. There were some that, were a little more inflammatory, of course, and that's true of any large group that you get. But by and large, I saw people that were just trying to get their voice heard, and they felt that they haven't been able to have their voice heard. And and I think, I'll never know this for sure. None of us will, but I think if the governor had taken the original stay-at-home order and eased some of the restrictions to allow for very low-risk operations to take place in the economy, I don't think you would have seen the level of concern that led to that protest. You may have had people there, but I think it would have been a smaller amount. And, some of the evidence of that is a week prior, when we were at the Capitol to extend the emergency by a few weeks till the end of April, there were maybe 50 people protesting on the Capitol lawn, but they weren't very worked up. They had a few "Don't Tread on Me" flags, but most of them had, little American flags and some stuff like that. And there were probably 50, maybe 75 people on the Capitol lawn. On Wednesday, there were easily thousands of people. I mean, there were thousands of cars, most of which had multiple people inside. And, if you had poured all those people onto the Capitol lawn in each of those cars, I think you would have had well over 10,000 people there at the Capitol on Wednesday. So,
wow.
I think, I think it really is a powerful message that the governor shouldn't ignore. This is a government built on consent of the governed, and we're a self-governed society. We can't pretend that we know better than everybody for forever.
Thank you.
Thanks, Greg. I know we're running a little bit short on time here, Tom. Are there any final questions that anybody has for our state senator?
Tom, this is Mike with SLH Metals in Corona. Thank you for your presentation today. That was very, very informative. I heard everything you said, and we're taking it to heart. But one question I have is on this paycheck protection money that dried up. I wonder if there's any provision, any way that you could introduce any legislation to the employers that went ahead and paid their payroll just like they were requested to do, and then this money dried up. If unemployment monies that would have been paid out in state unemployment could be diverted to back to the employers that picked up the tab.
Yeah, that's something we can definitely look at. Some of the issue that we'll face is that the federal government made the commitment and then kind of, dried up the funding for it. I will definitely see if that's something. I don't want to. I'm certainly sensitive to that situation, because that is a worst case scenario where you do the right thing, and then the promise that was made to you was not done to the conditions that were set forth. Unfortunately, because it was a federal program, we in the state can't force them to pay it out. We could conceivably use state money to pay it out, but with the just budget impact that we're looking at as a state to ourselves right now, having the just basic obligations we got to pay coming under really intense scrutiny, it's going to be hard to come up with new money for new programs. We're cutting existing programs and existing funding really quite severely, in all likelihood, and dipping into our state rainy day fund. The other thing about the rainy day fund is we actually passed a statute a few years ago that says we can only spend 25% of the rainy day fund in any year, and that was a protection so that if a future legislature and governor got in, they wouldn't just raid that fund, spend it on stupid things, and then we'd be left with no savings anymore. Theoretically, we could amend the law to take more money out of the rainy day fund and have that part of the discussion as well. But as it stands right now, we are only able to spend 25% of the funds in the rainy day fund in any given year. But no, that's an absolute legitimate point. And the other thing we'll do is I will pass that along to our federal legislators as a real sincere concern that these businesses did the right thing, they did what they were asked, and now they're being told there's not funds available to pay back the obligation that they made for doing the right thing. So I appreciate you bringing that up to me.
Thank you. Yeah, that we can't go on forever. We're going to have to return these people to the unemployment system. So
right.
If this doesn't get ironed out in the next short amount of time, we're going to be forced to put them back on unemployment anyway. So, and then benefits dry up, and it's just an avalanche of bad things happen. So
Right.
But I do
Right.
appreciate your time. You've been very informative today, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Hang in there, and I'm sorry you're facing that, because that's just totally unfair, and another example of a government-imposed hardship on a business that shouldn't have happened. And that's what frustrates me, is when we fail people, whether that's the state government, the federal government, or your local government, when we fail people by creating a hardship that didn't need to be there, by inflicting, hardship on our businesses, that to me is one of the worst, failures we can, other than taking somebody's liberties away, and putting them in prison for a crime they didn't commit. That's one of the worst examples we can do, is fail you that way, as a government.
Let's do, Tom, if you have time, maybe one more question, and then we'll wrap up for you. Anybody have
Yeah.
one last question for the senator? Okay, well, I think we got the questions covered then. Tom, once again, thank you for being incredibly generous with your time and your candor. You have a lot of support here in Shiawassee County. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Work on our behalf there in Lansing. And just so everybody knows, once again, can you give out your phone number and email if they want to contact your office?
Yeah. So my phone number, 517-373-3447. And my email is sentbarrett@senate.michigan.gov. My staff is receiving and responding to phone calls and emails remotely. If we ran into a situation where our voice mailbox was full in the office because we couldn't delete them remotely. So I've got a rotation set up where somebody's going to the office to, we can get it's interesting. We can get the voicemails remotely, but we can't delete them remotely. So now we are sending somebody into the office to delete the old messages after we've fielded them. So I apologize if you call and the voicemail box is full. We'll be, regularly checking that. So it shouldn't be something that you're facing for very long if it does happen.
Very good. And Tom, we will pass along to your office the ideas that our business owners are coming up with on safety guidelines. So you have that information.
Thank you. Thank you. And
Great.
Thank you for the work that all you are doing. Justin, thank you so much for having me this morning. And really, my prayers are with all of you. I know this is a tremendously difficult and stressful time. And really appreciate everybody on the phone today for the questions you asked and for the work that you're doing. I really, my hat's off to you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you, Tom. We'll let you go. We got a couple other things to cover on the call, so feel free to drop off.
Thank you.
But if anyone else wants to listen, we're going to cover a couple more items.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Tom. Okay. Well, I know that'll probably drop a few people off, and I know we're running a little bit late for our normal timeline, but wanted to hit a few items very quickly. Obviously, the big news yesterday, and we've heard it today, federal funding is gone for now. I have heard a couple of items I wanted to pass along, though. One lender told me they expected that roughly 25 to 30% of the requests were able to be funded with the first $350 billion. So that obviously, we know there's an issue with a lack of money right now, but it makes me wonder, is what they're even talking about, the additional $250 billion, going to be enough with that, I guess, low level of funding from the first 350. So it's obviously concerning, the idea that we'd have to ring up that much more debt, but I'm very concerned if we're only able to fund 25% of small businesses in America. I mean, what happens with the other 75? So definitely trying to push on our legislatures. Congressman Molinar, our two senators, I was in touch with their offices yesterday after the call. Obviously, it's out of our control, but definitely want to try to stay in touch with them to get that money back into the system and more money as quickly as possible. The other thing I wanted to note, though, and this actually is a little bit less clear, is pretty much every Shiawassee County company I've talked to is somewhere in the pipeline already, if not approved. And the question is, why there's a little bit of a lack of clarity is, where do you have to be to make sure you are part of that $350 billion? And I've heard a couple of different things from lenders on this, but the one that seems to be rising to the top is, if you have a number, an SBA number, a reference number, then that should have reserved money in the queue for you. So it sounds like that's a little bit maybe before the formal stamp of approval. I have that confirmed, but I've heard that from a couple lenders. So the reason I bring that up is it still may be possible, if you are at that stage, if you have an SBA reference number, then you may already be in the tent, so to speak, with that money. So once again, not confirmed, but I'm hoping that means there will be some additional Shiawassee County folks that will be getting their money. If you're not that far, then obviously we need to hope for additional funding. One other tool that is being talked about nationally as a potential help, and we brought it up the last couple days on the call, the Main Street Lending Program. We won't go into all the details today, but that is a much more limited pot of money in terms of who's going to qualify, because the minimum amount to borrow is $1 million, and that takes a lot of our companies off the table. But we'll definitely keep you updated on those federal funding programs as they arise, and hopefully, as I said, they'll get to work in Washington and get that money replenished quickly. A couple of things, actually, from the U.S. Chamber Foundation. There is a small grant program that is going to be opening up, I believe, on Monday. It's a national program, so I don't know how likely it is that companies are going to be able to get it here, but it's worth a shot. It's grants up to $5,000. I believe you have to have between 3 and 20 employees. We're going to send out some information on that. There's also something that they're doing every Monday and Thursday to identify ways we can reopen the economy. So they're talking about different aspects of the regulations that we were talking about with the senator. This is more on a national level. So they're doing Monday, Thursday webinars on this, and we'll send some information out on that if you're curious at a national perspective what we're looking at in terms of regulations to reopen. And along with that, as we were talking on the call with Tom, did put out a call yesterday for companies to let us know what you're doing or would do related to safety regulations. And as I said to Tom, we want to be able to share with him that information. So please, if you've not responded to that email, please do so. We're also working with the Shiawassee Regional Chamber and some other stakeholders on trying to assemble that information. I think it's a good thing. We know the regs are going to come down from the state and the feds, but I think it is a good thing if we want to be proactive in Shiawassee County to put, suggestions, ideas, plans together for reopening, and then being able to, at a minimum, send that information up to Lansing, but, also just share ideas with each other on that. And John Hank talked on the phone. I know downtown Owasso is working on some things. So definitely want to try to work collaboratively to reopen safely. One other thing I wanted to mention, this is a little bit different than the business side. It's more education focused. So congratulations and thanks to our state representative, Ben Frederick, for kicking off a mentor program. Some of you saw that announcement yesterday. We shared it via email. A lot of kids are going to be graduating from high school and college. They're not going to have their normal graduation and need some help, need some ideas on where to go, what to do. Ben assembled a team of folks from the community to be a resource to those people, to be mentors, to offer that guidance. So tremendous job by Ben in organizing all that, working with our RESD I know Lena Miller from our team is going to be part of that process, and just another way I think we're going to be able to help some of our youth get through this and look forward to their future career opportunities. So I wanted to mention that too. And then finally, I do it every day. I'll mention it again. Jobs, if anyone's hiring, if anyone needs promotion on your openings, please let us know, and we'll be happy to get the word out there. So with that, I don't know, we're over an hour, but if anyone has any additional comments or questions, please feel free to jump in now. Okay. Well, thank you all. Great session today. Appreciate your time. Have a good weekend. We will talk to you again next week. Thanks.